Welcome everybody to another week's Village Torah portion discussion. So this week is Parashat Vayeshev. We are in chapters 37, 38, 39, and 40, and we are still in the book of Genesis. So we have, interestingly, dreams. Dreams. Okay, we are focusing on dreams. And I'm going to explain a little bit why that is. In chapter 37, we really have, actually, you know what? This week's Torah portion is really focused mostly around Joseph. I mentioned there are 4 chapters. 3 of these chapters are focused on Joseph, with chapter 38 providing the exception. It is almost as if the camera, as it were, switches over to his brother Judah for chapter 38. But chapters 37, 39, and 40 in this week's Torah portion are focused on Joseph, with the first and last chapters, 37 and 40, focusing on Joseph and dreams. So let's dive into it. So in chapter 37, we really kick off with Joseph. Joseph is, we have discussed before, Joseph is the sole, at least at this point in time, the sole son of Rachel, amongst the children of Jacob. Now he does have children. He does have sons. He does have children from Leah, and also the 2 maidservants in the house. And what it actually interesting at the very beginning of this week's Torah portion says that Joseph, he was friendly with the maidservant's sons, so he didn't even hang out with Leah's sons. And we see that he then says, I had a dream of sheaves. I don't know if they're barley or wheat, but they were sheaves. And of these sheaves, they all bowed down. They all went in a circle and bowed down to my sheaf, which was remaining standing. Now, that's not exactly the way to have your brothers like you. And what was worse, he had another dream. He had a second dream, and he shared it also. He said, I dreamt there were 11 stars, as well as a sun and a moon, and they were bowing down. It was very clear in what Joseph was communicating to his brothers, was that he was the one they all should be bowing down to. Now, why? Right? They have no reason to bow down to him, at least not at this point in time. Why should we bow down to you? What are you, something special? And interestingly, ultimately, his father gives him what is called in Hebrew a ketonat pasim. And it's this many-colored, it's a colorful coat of some sort. It's certainly not something that wins the love of your brothers. They actually got, I don't know if it was jealous, but they certainly, maybe perhaps resentment would be perhaps a more accurate term to describe how his brothers and probably sister were feeling towards him. They were not happy. They were not a big fan of him. So he has these 2 dreams, and then later on, actually in the 19th verse in chapter 37, he wants to join his brothers. He wants to go hang out with them. And they say, oh, look who's coming. It's the dreamer. And they're like, let's see what will become of his dreams. So he clearly has not gained their favor. And them calling him the dreamer, it doesn't sound like it's a praise. It does not sound like a compliment. It seems, whether it's something of, it's just not kind, okay? It is not kind. Oh, he thinks he's so special. He has dreams. Everybody has dreams. And they ultimately then sell him off at the end of the chapter. And then we later see him in chapter 39, where he is sold off into someone's servitude, later accused of rape, and then sent into prison. So chapter 39, no dreams, definitely not a good chapter for Joseph. And then we do see more dreams in chapter 40, because also in jail were 2 servants of Pharaoh's, one the baker and the other the wine master. Clearly, bread and wine are 2 very important pieces of a diet, and certainly for a king. These are special. So we don't know exactly what it is that the baker nor the wine master did to earn them a spot in Pharaoh's prison, but there they are, where they encounter Joseph. Now they each have a dream, and they don't know what to do with these dreams. So they share them with Joseph, Mr. Dreamer himself. The baker's dream is that there are 3 different baskets with fine white bread in them, and they are all on his head. And the winemaker dreamt of 3 vines. So both of them share 3, right? 3 bread baskets, 3 vines. And of these 3 vines, the buds blossom. Ultimately, then he is able to squeeze these clusters of grapes, and squeezes these clusters of grapes into the Pharaoh's cup and hands it to him. Well, meanwhile, the baker, I mentioned, he has these 3 baskets of bread, fine white bread on his head, but then birds come and eat the bread out of these baskets. So what to make of them? So Joseph gives a more upbeat, a more optimistic interpretation to the wine master, saying, well, you know, the wine made it to Pharaoh's hand. You're good to go. Meanwhile, for the baker, he said, things are not going to end so well for you. And ultimately, that's what we see that happens at the end of chapter 40, at the end of this week's Torah portion, in which 3 days later, that's the 3 days later, it turns out it's Pharaoh's birthday. Yay, happy birthday. It's Pharaoh's birthday. And what does one do on a birthday, especially if you're Pharaoh? You throw a party. You throw a drinking party. It's very merry. It's very exciting. It's a very happy time. And someone loses their life. And that person would be, you guessed it, the baker. Now, and that's right, the wine master survives. So the wine master survives just as Joseph had interpreted his dream, and the baker dies just as, again, Joseph had interpreted his dream. The very tail end of this week's Torah portion, the wine master says, I'm going to remember you, Joseph. I'm not going to forget this. Thank you so much. This is really helpful. Except he does. The wine master totally forgets about Joseph, and he lives his life. He's still in Pharaoh's service as the wine master and totally forgets about Joseph. Now, sneak preview to next week's Torah portion, in which in chapter 41 of Genesis, we see that Pharaoh has dreams. You know, it's really interesting, actually, because in these 3 chapters of 37, 40, and 41, every time we see dreams, they are in pairs. It's a really interesting it's as if they're not just simply one-off dreams, that they come in pairs. In chapter 37, we saw Joseph's 2 dreams, right, about the sheaves and about the stars, sun, and moon. In chapter 40, we see both the baker and the wine master's dreams. And then at the very beginning of chapter 41, we see Pharaoh having a set of dreams as well, this couple. It's an interesting motif that these dreams aren't just random dreams, that they aren't lonely dreams, they are in pairs. So what we see at the very beginning of next week's Torah portion in chapter 41 of Genesis, Pharaoh has a couple of dreams, not sure what to make of them, and ultimately the wine master remembers, oh, that's right, I met a guy in prison and he interpreted dreams and it was a great interpretation. You should get him. I know a guy. That's what they do. So they go into the dungeon because Joseph hasn't gone anywhere. They go into the dungeon, they get Joseph out, they have him in front of Pharaoh, and he interprets the dreams. He interprets Pharaoh's dreams. One of the interesting things is it's not as if going to someone in prison is Pharaoh's first avenue. No, he consults his wise folks, his Khartoumim, as to what do these dreams mean, doesn't know. And ultimately that's when the wine master remembers and says, I know a guy, and gets Joseph. And Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Everybody seems to be happy. Ultimately, Joseph's interpretations were correct. And they clean him up, right? They clean him up because if you've been hanging out in jail for years, you're not going to be in good shape. So they give him a once over, shave, haircut, new wardrobe. They fix him up nicely. Now, and that ultimately sets up what later happens in both the book of Genesis and then ultimately in the book of Exodus, in which we see Joseph becomes part of the Egyptian government. He becomes I don't know if the term is a viceroy, but he becomes important in the Egyptian government and helping with the economy, with at least the agricultural aspects of the economy, and becomes very significant within Pharaoh's government. It almost seems as if more, and I know this is in next week's Torah portion, but I'm going to say it anyways, which is it seems that it's more than simply interpretation of dreams that impressed Pharaoh by Joseph, but that there was also something else about his wisdom and understanding that Joseph brought to the table in his conversation in next week's Torah portion in chapter 41 with Pharaoh. Now, I mentioned these pairings, I mentioned the dreams, I mentioned all these different things. These are great. Why? You know, it's interesting. For me, what really stuck out, and I did say, you know, it's fascinating. The reason we're talking about dreams this week, in this week's Torah portion of Vayeshev, is it is, in my mind, inescapable for us to talk about dreams. We can't not talk about dreams. I mentioned it starts and it begins and it ends this week's Torah portion. It is. It's not actually all that common in the Jewish Bible that dreams appear. It's really not that common, and that is something that particularly stands out to me, and that's why I had to talk about it. Now, if I actually calculated, I actually tallied it up, and how many times dreams or dreaming appears in the entirety of the Jewish Bible is 65 times. 65. Most of these appearances, 33 of them. So most of the times that we talk about dreams actually are all in just one book of the Bible, and that one book of the Bible is the book of Genesis. That's it. There's more than 2 other dozen books of the Bible, and yet Genesis has most of the appearances of dreaming. Now, of these, 28 of these 33 appear all within chapters 37 through 41 in Genesis. So this is really a huge chunking of dream, and it's so 28 out of 65 appearances throughout the entirety of the Jewish Bible are all right here in just these few chapters. So that's clearly a deeply huge number. I'm just calculating it right now, actually. 43%. 43% of all references in the entirety of the Jewish Bible to dreams are all right here in chapters 37 through 41. Who knew? So I did mention, so there are 33, so there's still another 5, let's see, there's still another, I take that back. There's actually 5, there's more, I'm sorry, there's 30, it appears 38 times in the entirety of the Torah. Let me take a step back and calculate, okay? There is 28 times within chapters 37 through 41, a 29th appearance in chapter 42, and then there are actually 5 previous times it appears in the book of Genesis. So there's actually 34 appearances in Genesis. So it's a significant chunk, and 4 other times throughout the other 4 books of the Torah. Now, if you are interested, what are these previous 5 appearances of the term dream or dreaming in the book of Genesis? The first 2 appear in chapter 20 when Avimelech has dreams. We see in chapter 31, Jacob has dreams. It mentions twice Jacob dreaming, and also in verse 24 of that same chapter, in chapter 31, Lavan has a dream. And then, as we see here, a bunch of other people have dreams. Joseph, Pharaoh, the wine master, the baker, but it's not just who has dreams. It's who is the interpreter. And that's what's key here, because Joseph really, it's not just who has the dreams, it's what's being done with them. And Joseph here is interpreting. He's interpreting his dreams. He's interpreting the baker and the wine masters. He's interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams. And ultimately, that's what elevates him. He gets a nickname. He gets a nickname in next week's Torah portion called Tzafnat Paneach. Not really clear how to interpret it or to translate it, but I think it's translated as dream interpreter. Like that's what he's known for, is interpretation of dreams. That's what he becomes known for, both in Egypt and clearly in the Torah, and certainly throughout the entirety of the Jewish Bible. He is the dream interpreter par excellence. He is the paragon of what it means to interpret dreams. This is something special for Joseph. And yeah, this is the biggest chunk of dreams in the entirety of the Jewish Bible, which is exactly why I couldn't avoid it for this week. I clearly had to talk about it. Now, what we see is not it's not a negative thing. Actually, this is something that is lauded. This is laudatory to interpret dreams. And there's an interesting statement in and the idea of interpreting dreams is it's a good thing. It's not looked down as a bad thing. In the way that the rabbis talk about dreams, it's a really it's fascinating, because one thing that they say is dreams are like a 1/60th of prophecy. Now, they're not saying that dreams are prophecies, but it sounds like there's a teeny tiny resonance, a portion of prophecy somehow embedded in dreams. There's something, because I think people understand, I think what the rabbis are understanding by this is dreams are not about the past. Dreams have something to do with the future, which is an interesting perspective. Another statement also in the Talmud is by Rav Chisda, and this 3rd century rabbi I really like what he had to say. He said, an uninterpreted dream is like an unopened letter, meaning there's a message waiting for you, just sitting there, and all you have to do is interpret it. Now, as the rabbis discuss, dreams can be interpreted many ways. The same person can have the same dream and have multiple interpretations depending upon not only whom they take it to, but they can even take it to the same person and have it interpreted differently depending upon different circumstances. So dreams, I think, are perceived as having an interesting potential to them and a certain interesting power to them as well. And how do we tap into them? And that's a really curious question. How do we do that? What do we do? Of course, I think people may be familiar with an earlier 20th century figure, also just like Joseph, also a Jew living outside of the land of Israel. And this Jew's name was Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud certainly had interesting ideas about dream interpretation, and certainly had, just as Joseph influenced his dream interpretations way beyond himself, right? Pharaoh and the rest of Egypt. Sigmund Freud had an influence on the way people throughout the world have understood dreams and interpreting dreams. And so the interpretation of dreams is still with us. It's such a fascinating, dreams are such a fascinating piece of human life. They don't just happen. They mostly happen when we are sleeping. We're asleep. Everybody sleeps. And hopefully everybody dreams, although I've heard of people not dreaming, but people dream. We all dream. What do we do with those dreams? Do we just sweep them aside and ignore them? Do we look at them and try to, like a letter, open them up and try to understand what's going on? Do we try to interpret, read, and get a sense of what is going on with what I've perceived or somehow experienced in my non-waking hours? So there's certainly a lot there to consider as far as dreams, but this week's Torah portion is really the bulk. It's the focus, along with the beginning of next week's Torah portion, with dreams in the certainly the Torah, but the Jewish Bible as a whole. And it's and it's led by the master the master dream interpreter himself, Joseph.
That's true. I didn't know that there were 39 times the dreams were mentioned in just Genesis. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And then the rest of our Bible, the next 3 chapters, only 39 times or less than 39, it's mentioned. And it's interesting how much the kings and such believed in dream interpretation.
Yeah.
The Pharaoh went through dream interpretation to let the Jewish people leave Israel or leave Egypt, right?
What was it? What do you mean?
The Pharaoh, when Moses led our people out of Egypt, wasn't it after the interpretation of the Pharaohs, whatever they're called, that interpret such or another, that he finally let us go, let us leave?
I mean, he did consult magicians, although it wasn't due to a dream. It was just simply, he realized it was just too much.
Well,
that was a later Pharaoh later on down the line, as opposed to the Pharaoh that we're talking about here in Genesis.
Right. I find it very interesting. I really do. I'm going to go back and read that portion, interpretation, in the book that I have that I'm following each particular week's reading. And I've really, really gotten into it.
Well,
what is that hanging behind you?
So that's actually, we got it from Rachel's brother. I don't know where he got it, but it's the Hebrew of Psalm 23.
Oh.
Yeah.
What a beautiful thing to have hanging in your home.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's and it's very sturdy. It's not a painting. It's like on
No, it's been framed.
Yes. Yes. It's pretty neat.
Well, and thank you for this. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, great. I'm very glad that you're enjoying it.
I am. I really am. Thank you.